My daughter-in-law told me I was too embarrassing to attend her baby shower and that I should stay home so I wouldn't ruin her special day with my tackiness. Then she tried to throw me out of what she thought was her house when I showed up anyway to support my son. That's when I decided it was time to tell her the truth. I own the house she's been living in rent-free for 2 years, and her lease was about to expire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, 58 years old, and I've lived in the charming town of Millbrook Falls for my entire life. My late husband Richard and I built a successful property management business from the ground up, starting with just one rental house and growing it into a portfolio of 12 properties throughout the county. When Richard passed away 4 years ago, I inherited everything, but I've always preferred to keep a low profile about our wealth. I drive a modest Honda, shop at regular stores, and live simply in the same ranch house where we raised our children. My son David, 31, has always been the light of my life. He's kind, hardworking, and genuine, everything a mother could hope for in a son. David works as a high school math teacher here in Millbrook Falls, a job he's passionate about even though it doesn't pay much. He's never cared about money or status symbols, which is one of the things I'm most proud of about him. 2.5 years ago, David started dating Veronica Kane, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator who had just moved to our area from the big city of Riverside Heights. Veronica was different from the girls David usually dated. She was polished, ambitious, and very concerned with appearances. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, wore designer clothes even to casual dinners, and always seemed to be taking photos of herself for social media. When David first introduced me to Veronica, I tried my best to be welcoming. I invited them over for my famous pot roast dinner, but Veronica barely touched the food and kept making comments about how quaint and rustic everything was. She spent most of the evening on her phone, posting photos of the, quote, authentic country dinner experience, with captions that felt somehow condescending. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but David was smitten. Veronica had a way of making him feel like he was lucky to be with someone so sophisticated and worldly. She would talk about her friends back in Riverside Heights who were lawyers and executives, always with this subtle implication that David's small-town teaching job was somehow beneath her usual standards. 6 months into their relationship, David asked if they could rent one of my properties. Veronica had been living in a cramped apartment above the old bakery on Main Street, and David wanted them to have more space together. I had a beautiful 3-bedroom house on Elm Street that had just become available. It was one of my nicest properties, with updated kitchen appliances, hardwood floors, and a gorgeous garden that Richard had designed himself. Here's where I made what I now realize was a crucial mistake. Instead of handling this as a normal business transaction, I decided to let them live there rent-free as an engagement gift when they got engaged 8 months later. I told David it was my way of helping them save money for their future together. What I didn't tell them was that I was the actual owner. I had my property manager, Mrs. Henderson, handle all the paperwork and communications, so they thought they were dealing with some anonymous landlord who had agreed to waive rent temporarily. I thought I was being generous and supportive. I thought Veronica would appreciate the gesture once she eventually learned the truth. I was wrong on both counts. Living in that beautiful house seemed to change something in Veronica. She started posting constantly on social media about her home, decorating it with expensive furniture that I knew David couldn't afford on his teacher's salary. She would throw dinner parties for her new Millbrook Falls friends, always making sure to mention how she'd, quote, transformed this space, and how she had such an eye for design. Meanwhile, her treatment of me grew increasingly cold and dismissive. She would make little comments about my clothes, my car, my house. She'd suggest that David was outgrowing his small-town roots, and that maybe he should consider looking for opportunities in bigger cities where people, quote, understood ambition. She started declining invitations to family dinners, always with polite excuses, but the message was clear. She was embarrassed by David's simple, working-class family. The real turning point came when Veronica announced her pregnancy 6 months ago. I was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, but Veronica seemed to view my excitement as somehow inappropriate. She made it clear that she had very specific ideas about how things should be done, and those ideas didn't include much input from David's small-town family. She planned an elaborate baby shower with a professional event planner, expensive decorations, and a guest list full of her new social media friends and colleagues. The invitations were these fancy cards with gold lettering and RSVP requirements. When I asked David about the details, he seemed embarrassed and said Veronica was really excited about making it special. That's when Veronica sat me down for what she called an honest conversation about expectations. She told me that while she appreciated my enthusiasm, she needed me to understand that this was a sophisticated event, and that she was worried about the impression we'll make on important people. She said she thought it would be better for everyone if I stayed home and maybe visited the next day to see the gifts. When I asked her to clarify what she meant, Veronica's mask finally slipped. She said she was concerned about my presentation and that some of her friends were very image-conscious. She said she didn't want to have to explain or make excuses for family members who didn't fit the aesthetic she was going for. That's when I realized that the sweet, generous gesture I thought I'd been making had actually enabled someone to disrespect my son, my family, and me. And that's when I decided it was time for some long overdue honesty about who exactly owned the house Veronica had been calling her own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I need to explain how we got to this point, because Veronica's behavior didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual transformation that I watched with growing concern over the past 2.5 years, like watching someone you care about slowly change into someone you don't recognize. When David first brought Veronica home to meet me, I genuinely tried to like her. She was undeniably beautiful and seemed to make my son happy, which was all that mattered to me initially. But there were subtle red flags from that very first dinner that I chose to overlook because I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Veronica arrived at my house wearing a white designer dress and heels that were completely inappropriate for a casual family dinner. When I hugged her hello, she went stiff as a board and barely returned the embrace. Throughout the evening, she kept checking her reflection in her phone camera and adjusting her makeup. She photographed her plate before eating and spent several minutes finding the right angle and lighting. During dinner, I asked her about her work at the marketing firm in Riverside Heights. Veronica launched into this elaborate description of her, quote, campaigns and brand strategies, using so much corporate jargon that I honestly couldn't follow half of it. When I asked follow-up questions to show interest, she would pause and then explain things to me like I was a child, speaking slowly and using overly simple terms. The moment that should have been my first real warning came when Veronica asked to use the bathroom. When she came back, she had this strange expression on her face. Later, I realized she had been judging my house, the family photos on the walls, the modest furniture, the fact that my bathroom still had the original 1980s fixtures that Richard and I had never bothered to update because they worked fine. "Your home is so authentic," she said to David, not to me. "It's like a time capsule, very genuine." The way she said genuine made it sound like an insult disguised as a compliment. David, bless his heart, was completely oblivious to the subtle digs. He was so proud to introduce us and kept looking back and forth between Veronica and me like he was hoping we'd become best friends. When Veronica barely touched my pot roast, a recipe that had been in my family for 3 generations, David actually apologized to me later, saying she was probably just nervous and had refined tastes from living in the city. That should have been my second warning sign. My own son was already making excuses for her rudeness. As their relationship progressed, Veronica's behavior toward me became increasingly patronizing. She would ask David questions about me as if I wasn't sitting right there. "Does your mom always cook such hearty meals?" Or, "Is this the style of decorating that's popular around here?" always with that fake, sweet tone that barely concealed her judgment. The class differences became a constant undercurrent in every interaction. Veronica would mention her friends' jobs, their expensive vacations, their designer purchases, always with this subtle implication that David's family was somehow lacking in sophistication. She had a way of making comments that sounded complimentary on the surface but felt like criticism underneath. "It must be so peaceful to live somewhere where you don't have to worry about keeping up with trends," she'd say. Or, "I love how unpretentious everything is here. No one puts on airs or tries to impress anyone." The subtext was always clear. We were simple, small-town people who didn't know any better. What hurt the most was watching how this affected David. My confident, secure son started second-guessing himself around her. He'd apologize for things that didn't need apologizing for. The restaurant he'd chosen wasn't fancy enough. His car was too old. His clothes weren't stylish enough. Veronica never directly criticized him, but she had this way of raising her eyebrows or making little comments that made him feel inadequate. The engagement happened faster than I expected. David proposed after only 8 months of dating, and I suspected it was because Veronica had been dropping hints about her friends back in Riverside Heights who were all getting engaged or married. She posted dozens of photos of her ring on social media, always with captions about finding love in unexpected places and small-town charm. That's when David asked about renting one of my properties. He was embarrassed about asking, explaining that Veronica's apartment was too small and that they wanted to start their life together properly. He offered to pay market rate, but I could tell they were stretching financially. David's teaching salary was modest, and while Veronica talked about her marketing job like it was high-powered, I suspected she wasn't making as much as she pretended. I made the decision to let them live rent-free as what I thought was a generous wedding gift. I told David it was temporary, just to help them get on their feet, but in my heart, I was hoping it would help Veronica see that David's family wasn't as simple as she seemed to think. I thought eventually she'd learn about my property business and realize that her assumptions about us were wrong. Instead, the opposite happened. Living in that beautiful house seemed to feed Veronica's sense of superiority. She started acting like she belonged in a nicer neighborhood, like she deserved better things. She began referring to David's teaching job as a stepping stone and suggesting he should look into more ambitious career paths. The social media posting became constant. Every room in the house, every meal she cooked, every outfit she wore. Everything was content for her image as a sophisticated young woman who had upgraded her living situation. She started hosting dinner parties and posting about her entertaining style and her eye for design. Meanwhile, her treatment of me grew colder and more dismissive. She would decline invitations to family gatherings with increasingly elaborate excuses. When she did attend, she would sit slightly apart from everyone else, checking her phone and looking like she was enduring some kind of hardship. The most telling incident happened last Christmas. I had invited David and Veronica for our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Nothing fancy, just family favorites and homemade cookies. Veronica arrived wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than I spend on clothes in a year. She spent the entire evening taking photos of what she called rustic holiday traditions and posting them with captions like, "Experiencing authentic small-town Christmas charm." She treated my family traditions like they were some kind of anthropological exhibit for her city friends to gawk at. When my sister asked about her family's Christmas traditions, Veronica launched into stories about elaborate parties and expensive gifts, always with this underlying message that our simple celebration was quaint but primitive. That night, I heard her talking to David in the kitchen. She was suggesting that maybe next year they should start their own traditions, something more sophisticated that would reflect their growth as a couple. She said it would be, quote, for David's professional development to start networking with more ambitious people instead of staying stuck in family obligations. That's when I realized that Veronica wasn't just embarrassed by me. She was actively trying to separate David from his family and his roots. She saw us as obstacles to her vision of the life she wanted to create. And the house I had given them as a gesture of love and support had become the platform for her to reinvent herself and look down on the people who had helped make it possible. The pregnancy announcement 6 months ago should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, it became another opportunity for Veronica to establish her superiority and control. From the moment she told us the news, she made it clear that this baby was going to be raised according to her standards, not ours. The first major incident that should have opened my eyes completely happened during Veronica's baby shower planning process, but it wasn't the baby shower itself. It was what led up to it. About 3 months into her pregnancy, Veronica started making comments about how she wanted everything to be perfect for her child. She began researching the most expensive baby gear, creating elaborate Pinterest boards, and talking constantly about the kind of elevated childhood experience she wanted to provide. She started dropping hints about how important it was to surround the baby with the right kind of influences and positive role models. When I offered to help set up a nursery, Veronica politely declined, saying she had already hired a professional interior designer who specialized in sophisticated children's spaces. The designer, she mentioned casually, charged $300 just for the initial consultation. I watched David's face when she said this. He looked uncomfortable, and I could tell he was worried about the expense, but he didn't say anything. Later, when I asked him privately if they could afford all these elaborate plans, he admitted they were stretching their budget, but said Veronica had her heart set on doing things the right way. The baby shower planning began in earnest around her 5th month of pregnancy. Veronica announced that she was hiring Event Perfect, the most expensive party planning company in the Tri-County area. She said she wanted to, quote, celebrate this milestone properly, and that she had been saving up for something special. She rented the ballroom at the Grandview Country Club, the same venue where the mayor's daughter had held her wedding reception last year. When David mentioned the country club rental to me, I could hear the stress in his voice. The Grandview Country Club was where the wealthiest families in our area held their events. A single afternoon rental cost more than David made in a month. I gently asked if maybe they should consider something more modest, but David said Veronica had already put down the deposit and sent out save-the-date cards. The guest list became another source of tension. Veronica invited 75 people, most of whom were her new social media connections from Millbrook Falls, and several friends who were driving down from Riverside Heights for the event. She made a point of mentioning that several of the guests were influential people in the community. The bank president's wife, the real estate developer who had built the new shopping center, the owner of the upscale boutique downtown. What struck me as odd was that none of David's longtime friends or family members received invitations in that first wave. When I asked David about this, he said Veronica was still working on the guest list, and that she wanted to make sure the numbers worked out right. I offered to help with the costs if that was the issue, but David quickly declined, saying Veronica wanted to handle everything herself. 2 weeks before the shower, Veronica finally mentioned that she would probably invite David's family. She said it casually, like an afterthought, while discussing flower arrangements. When David pointed out that his family should definitely be included, Veronica agreed but said she hoped everyone would understand the tone she was trying to set. That's when she started making comments about what people should wear. She created a detailed Pinterest board with outfit inspiration that featured exclusively designer clothing and professional styling. She sent group messages to the female guests with suggestions for hair and makeup, recommending specific salons and beauty services. She even included links to the exact nail polish colors that would, quote, the event palette. The pressure she was putting on everyone was intense. I heard from David that several of his female relatives were stressed about the dress code and were planning to buy new outfits they couldn't really afford. His cousin Janet called me in tears, saying she felt like she needed to get her hair professionally done, but couldn't justify the expense. His Aunt Ruth mentioned that she was considering not attending because she didn't want to embarrass Veronica by not meeting the standards. Meanwhile, Veronica was posting daily updates on social media about the shower preparations. She shared photos of the venue, the designer invitations, the custom floral arrangements, and the professional photographer she had hired to document the event. Each post included hashtags like #BabyShowerGoals and #LegantExpectations and #LuxuryLifestyle. The catering alone was costing more than most people spend on their entire wedding reception. Veronica had ordered a multi-course seated dinner instead of the traditional finger foods and cake. She hired a sommelier to select appropriate non-alcoholic beverages and a pastry chef to create what she called an artistic dessert experience. She even arranged for a harpist to provide live music during the gift opening. 3 days before the shower, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was Mrs. Henderson, my property manager, calling about a routine matter with one of my other rental properties. During our conversation, she mentioned that she had received several calls from vendors trying to confirm deliveries to the Elm Street house for the Kane baby shower. Vendors? I asked, confused. Mrs. Henderson explained that apparently Veronica had been having items delivered to the house: specialty linens, additional furniture rentals, professional lighting equipment for the photographer, and several boxes of what appeared to be party favors and decorations. The delivery drivers had been asking Mrs. Henderson about access instructions and parking arrangements for the event's setup. "I think there might be some confusion," Mrs. Henderson said. "The tenant seems to think she's hosting some kind of large event at the property, but there's nothing in the lease about commercial use or large gatherings." That's when I realized what was happening. Veronica wasn't just having her baby shower at the country club. She was planning some kind of elaborate pre-party or preparation event at the house. She was treating my property like it was her personal event venue, making modifications and arrangements without asking permission or even acknowledging that she was living there courtesy of someone else's generosity. I called David immediately to ask about these deliveries. He sounded surprised and said he didn't know anything about vendor deliveries or events set up at the house. When he asked Veronica about it, she casually explained that she was having a, quote, small intimate gathering the night before the shower for her closest friends to help with final preparations. This small intimate gathering turned out to be a professionally catered dinner party for 25 people, complete with hired staff and professional floral arrangements. Veronica had essentially planned a second party without mentioning it to David or asking permission to use the property for commercial entertaining. But the most shocking part was still to come. The next day, I discovered that Veronica had been telling people that she owned the house on Elm Street. One of the vendors called Mrs. Henderson asking about payment arrangements and mentioned that, quote, the homeowner, Ms. Kane, had requested that all bills be sent directly to her. When Mrs. Henderson corrected the vendor and explained that Ms. Kane was a tenant, not the owner, the vendor seemed confused. He said that Ms. Kane had specifically told him that she owned the property and was planning to use it regularly for entertaining and social events. That evening, I drove past the Elm Street house and saw cars parked all along the street. Through the windows, I could see servers in white uniforms moving around with trays, and I could hear laughter and music. Veronica was hosting an elaborate dinner party in my house, with my utilities, using my space, while telling people that she owned the property. The final straw came the next morning when I received a call from my insurance agent. Apparently, someone had contacted the insurance company asking about updating the policy for the Elm Street property to include regular entertainment and social events. The caller had identified herself as Veronica Kane and claimed to be the property owner seeking to add commercial use coverage. That's when I realized that Veronica hadn't just been disrespectful or thoughtless. She had been actively deceiving people about her living situation and potentially creating legal and financial liabilities for me. She was using my generosity as a platform to create a fake lifestyle and lying about property ownership to support her elaborate social pretensions. The baby shower was the next day, and I was no longer just hurt by her attitude toward me personally. I was angry about the fraud, The deception, and the way she was exploiting my family's kindness while simultaneously looking down on us as beneath her standards. The morning of Veronica's baby shower, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with being excluded from the event. After discovering her lies about owning my property and her unauthorized use of the house for entertaining, I had spent most of the night trying to decide how to handle the situation. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part of me knew that David would be caught in the middle, and I didn't want to ruin what should have been a happy day for him. I decided to drive by the country club around noon, not to crash the party, but just to see the elaborate event that was costing my son so much money and causing so much stress for our family. What I saw in the parking lot told me everything I needed to know about the guest list and the social dynamics at play. The parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles, BMW SUVs, Mercedes sedans, and even a few cars I didn't recognize, but that clearly cost more than David makes in 2 years. I watched as women in designer dresses and professional makeup walked toward the entrance, many of them carrying gift bags that looked like they came from high-end boutiques. These weren't the kind of people who shopped at the same stores I did, or worried about the cost of a hair appointment. I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching the procession of guests, and I noticed something that made my heart ache for David. I didn't recognize a single person going into that building. Not one familiar face from our community, our church, or David's longtime friend group. This wasn't a celebration of David becoming a father. It was Veronica's debut into Millbrook Falls high society, using her pregnancy as the excuse. Around 2 p.m., I decided to drive past our old neighborhood, where David's childhood friends still lived. I found exactly what I suspected I would find. Several of David's closest friends, sitting on Tommy Richardson's front porch, drinking beer and looking dejected. These were the guys David had grown up with, played sports with, and maintained friendships with through college and beyond. I pulled over and talked to them for a few minutes. Tommy told me that none of them had received invitations to the baby shower, which didn't surprise them because Veronica had made it clear over the past year that she found David's old friends immature and lacking ambition. But what did surprise them was that David hadn't even mentioned the shower to them directly. "It's like he's embarrassed by us now," said Mike Patterson, who had been David's best friend since elementary school. "Ever since he started dating her, it's like we're not good enough for his new life." Marcus Chen, another longtime friend, mentioned that David had declined the last 3 invitations to their monthly poker games, always with excuses about prior commitments or other obligations. They suspected these obligations involved Veronica's social events with her new crowd. What broke my heart was learning that David hadn't even told his closest friends about the pregnancy until Veronica was already 4 months along. They found out through social media posts, not from David personally. These men who had been planning to be uncles to David's children someday were being systematically excluded from his life. Meanwhile, I knew that inside the country club, Veronica was probably holding court with women who barely knew her, accepting expensive gifts and playing the role of the sophisticated expectant mother. The contrast was stark and painful. David's real community was sitting on a front porch feeling rejected, while strangers celebrated at an event that was draining his bank account. That afternoon, I decided to visit David's Aunt Martha, who lived about an hour away in Riverside County. Martha had helped raise David after his father died, and she was one of the most important women in his life. I assumed she would be getting ready for the shower, but when I arrived, I found her working in her garden, clearly not dressed for any kind of event. "Oh, Eleanor," she said when she saw me, "I was wondering if you were going to Veronica's party today." When I told her I hadn't been invited, her face fell. "You weren't invited either? I thought maybe I had missed something or gotten the date wrong." It turned out that Martha, along with David's other aunts and female cousins, had been excluded from the guest list entirely. Veronica had somehow managed to plan a baby shower for David's child without inviting any of the women who had been central figures in David's life. The realization hit both of us at the same time. This wasn't an oversight or a space limitation issue. This was deliberate. Martha and I spent the afternoon comparing notes about Veronica's behavior over the past 2 years. Martha had noticed the same patterns I had. The subtle put-downs, the social climbing, The way Veronica seemed embarrassed by David's family and background. Martha mentioned that David had stopped bringing Veronica to family gatherings months ago, always with vague excuses about scheduling conflicts. The last time I saw them together, Martha said, David seemed different, quieter, like he was constantly worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. As we talked, I began to understand the full scope of what Veronica was doing. She wasn't just trying to elevate her own social status. She was systematically isolating David from his support system and replacing his lifelong relationships with connections that served her ambitions. The baby shower wasn't a celebration of their growing family. It was a statement about the kind of people she wanted in their lives going forward. Around 4 p.m., Martha's neighbors stopped by and mentioned that she had seen photos from the baby shower on Facebook. Veronica had been posting live updates throughout the event, and the neighbor showed us some of the images on her phone. The photos showed an incredibly elaborate setup, professional floral arrangements, a multi-tiered cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and guests wearing outfits that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But what struck me most was Veronica's expression in the photos. She looked triumphant, almost smug, like she had accomplished something important. In one photo, she was surrounded by women I didn't recognize, all of them perfectly styled and holding champagne glasses, looking like they were celebrating Veronica's successful social climbing as much as her pregnancy. There wasn't a single photo that included David prominently. He appeared in the background of a few shots, looking uncomfortable in a suit that I suspected was new and expensive. In one image, I could see him checking his phone, probably hoping for messages from the friends and family members who hadn't been deemed worthy of inclusion. The most telling photo was one that Veronica had posted with the caption, "Surrounded by my Millbrook Falls family." The women in the photo were all people she had met within the past year. Social connections, not genuine relationships. She was literally rewriting the definition of family to exclude the people who had actually been part of David's life. That evening, after the shower had ended, I drove past the Elm Street house and saw several cars still parked outside. Through the windows, I could see that Veronica was hosting an after-party, showing off all the expensive gifts she had received to a smaller group of her new friends. The house was brightly lit, and I could see people moving around with drinks and cameras, documenting this continuation of her special day. I sat in my car across the street, looking at my own property being used to celebrate my exclusion from my future grandchild's life, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or social awkwardness anymore. Veronica was actively working to erase David's past and rebuild his identity around her vision of success and sophistication. The woman who had told me I was too embarrassing to attend her baby shower was literally living in my house, using my generosity to fund her social climbing, while systematically cutting David off from everyone who had loved and supported him long before she came into the picture. She was rewriting his story to fit her narrative, and she was using my own property as the stage for this performance. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. It was time for Veronica to learn some uncomfortable truths about exactly whose generosity had made her new lifestyle possible. The confrontation came 3 days after the baby shower, but not in the way I had planned. I had intended to have a calm, private conversation with David first, to explain what I had discovered about Veronica's lies and the unauthorized use of my property. I wanted to give him a chance to address the situation before I took any direct action. But Veronica forced my hand in the most dramatic way possible. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was at home reviewing some paperwork from Mrs. Henderson about maintenance issues at my other properties when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was coming from the Elm Street house, which surprised me because David should have been at school teaching his second period algebra class. "Mrs. Whitmore?" The voice was unfamiliar. A young woman with a professional tone. "This is Jessica from Premier Home Staging. I'm calling about the property assessment we're conducting today at 428 Elm Street. We're having some difficulty accessing certain areas of the house, and we need to speak with the property owner about removing some personal items that are interfering with our staging process." I was completely confused. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. That's a residential property with current tenants. There shouldn't be any staging company there. There was a pause on the other end. Ma'am, we were hired by Veronica Kane, who told us she owns this property and is preparing it for a potential sale. She said she needed a professional assessment of the home's market value and staging requirements. Are you saying Ms. Kane doesn't own this house? My blood ran cold. Not only was Veronica continuing to lie about owning my property, but now she was apparently planning to sell it. No, she absolutely does not own that house. I own it, and Ms. Kane is a tenant. I need you to stop whatever you're doing immediately and leave the property. Jessica sounded flustered. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Ms. Kane provided us with keys and showed us documents that appeared to show ownership. She said she inherited the property from a relative and was looking to upgrade to something larger before the baby arrives. Should we call the police? I told Jessica to pack up and leave immediately, and that I would handle the situation with my tenant directly. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for several minutes, trying to process what I had just heard. Veronica wasn't just lying about owning my house. She was actively trying to sell it out from under me. She had created fake ownership documents and was meeting with staging professionals to prepare my property for sale. I called Mrs. Henderson immediately and asked her to meet me at the Elm Street property right away. Then I drove straight there, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. When I arrived, I found a premier home staging van in the driveway and 2 women carrying furniture and decorative items out of my house. Veronica was standing in the front yard wearing a maternity dress that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries, directing the staging team like she was the lady of the manor. When she saw my car pull up, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like panic. "Eleanor," she called out, walking toward me with that fake smile she always used. "What a surprise! What brings you by?" I looked past her at the staging team loading expensive furniture into their van. "What's going on here, Veronica?" "Oh, this?" She waved casually toward the activity. "I'm just having some professionals help me reorganize the space. You know how it is when you're pregnant? Nesting instincts and all that. I want everything to be perfect before the baby arrives." It was such a brazen lie that I almost couldn't respond. The staging company had literally told me she was preparing to sell the house, and she was standing there claiming it was pregnancy nesting. "Veronica, I just spoke with the staging company. They told me you hired them to prepare this house for sale. They said you told them you own this property." Her expression changed completely. The fake sweetness disappeared, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw genuine anger cross her face. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is my house, and I can do whatever I want with it." "No, Veronica, it's not your house. I own this house. You're living here rent-free because I wanted to help you and David start your lives together." She laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "That's ridiculous. David and I pay rent to some property management company. We have a lease and everything. I don't know why you would make up such an obvious lie." I realized that David had never told her the truth about the rent arrangement. He had let her believe they were paying rent when in fact I had been covering everything. But that still didn't explain her claims of ownership or her attempt to stage the house for sale. "Veronica, even if you were paying rent, that wouldn't make you the owner. Why did you tell the staging company that you own this house?" That's when her mask completely slipped. "Because I deserve to own a house like this," she snapped. "I've put months of work into making this place beautiful and sophisticated. I've invested my time and energy into creating the perfect home for my family. David would never have had the vision or the drive to create something like this without me." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "You've invested your time and energy into decorating a house that belongs to someone else, using money that David can't afford, while lying about ownership to professional service providers." "I haven't lied about anything," she shot back. "This house is going to be mine eventually anyway. David and I are building a life together, and this is part of our future. I'm just being proactive about securing our assets." What assets? Veronica, you don't own anything here, you're a tenant in my house. That's when she said something that revealed the depth of her delusion and entitlement. Well, maybe it's time that changed. David deserves better than having his family dependent on handouts from people who don't understand what we're trying to build here. She had been about to say something insulting about me, but caught herself. Still, the implication was clear. She saw my generosity as a handout from someone beneath her station, and she believed she and David deserved to simply take ownership of what I had given them. "Where is David?" I asked, looking around for my son's car. "He's at work, obviously. This doesn't concern him anyway. This is between you and me." "This absolutely concerns David. This is his family's property, and you're making fraudulent claims about ownership." Veronica's voice got louder and more aggressive. "Fraudulent? I've been living here for 2 years. I've made this place beautiful. I've created a home here. If anyone has a right to this house, it's me, not some." She paused, clearly trying to control herself. "Not some what, Veronica?" "Not some small-town nobody who doesn't even understand what David and I are building together," she finished, her voice dripping with contempt. That's when I realized that all the subtle insults, all the condescending comments, all the social climbing and exclusion, it had all been leading to this moment. Veronica genuinely believed that she was superior to David's family, and that our generosity was something she was entitled to claim as her own achievement. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" "Get out of my house right now." Veronica laughed again, that harsh sound that made my skin crawl. "You can't make me leave. I live here. I have rights." "You have the right to pack your belongings and find somewhere else to live. You do not have the right to lie about ownership, stage my property for sale, or treat my family's generosity like it's your personal entitlement." "We'll see about that," she said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling David right now, and we'll settle this once and for all. He's not going to let you throw his pregnant wife out of her own home." As I watched her dial David's number, I realized that this confrontation was exactly what needed to happen. For 2 years, I had watched Veronica manipulate situations and control narratives. But now, in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, with her lies exposed and her true character on full display, she was about to force David to choose between her delusions and his family's reality. And for the first time since this whole situation began, I felt confident about which choice my son would make. David arrived at the house 20 minutes later, his face pale and confused. I could see him taking in the scene. The staging company van still in the driveway, Veronica standing with her arms crossed looking defiant, and me standing by my car with Mrs. Henderson, who had arrived just minutes before David did. "What's going on?" David asked, looking back and forth between Veronica and me. Veronica called me crying, saying there was some kind of emergency and that Mom was trying to kick us out of our house. Veronica immediately rushed to his side, putting her hand on his arm in that possessive way she had perfected. "David, your mother showed up here making crazy accusations about ownership and telling me to get out. She's trying to destroy our family right before our baby is born." I watched my son's face as he processed this information. David looked exhausted, like he had been running on stress and worry for months. His teaching job was demanding enough without coming home to constant drama and financial pressure from Veronica's expensive lifestyle. "Mom," he said carefully, "can you explain what's happening here?" Mrs. Henderson stepped forward and introduced herself to David. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Patricia Henderson, your mother's property manager. I handle the rental agreements and maintenance for all of Mrs. Whitmore's properties, including this one." David's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching recognition. "Property manager? What do you mean, all of my mother's properties?" That's when I realized that David truly had no idea about the extent of my real estate holdings. He knew I owned some rental properties, but he had never understood that I was actually a successful businesswoman with significant assets. Veronica's constant comments about my simple lifestyle had apparently convinced him that his family was genuinely struggling financially. "David," I said gently, Your father and I built a property management business over 30 years. I own 12 rental properties in this area, including this house. When you and Veronica got engaged, I decided to let you live here rent-free as my gift to help you start your marriage." The color drained from David's face. "Rent-free? But I thought we were paying." He turned to look at Veronica, who suddenly became very interested in examining her manicure. Mrs. Henderson pulled out a folder she had brought with her. "I have all the documentation here, Mr. Whitmore. The lease agreement shows that rent payments were waived by the property owner, your mother, as of your move-in date 2 years ago." David took the papers and read through them slowly. I could see his hands trembling slightly as he processed the information. "Veronica, did you know about this? Did you know we weren't paying rent?" Veronica's carefully constructed composure was starting to crack. "Does it matter? We've been living here, we've been taking care of the place, we've made it beautiful. Why does it matter who's technically on some paperwork?" "It matters," David said, his voice getting stronger, "because I've been stressed about money for 2 years. I've been working extra tutoring sessions and summer school programs to help cover what I thought was our housing costs. I've been losing sleep worrying about whether we could afford to raise a baby." The implications of what David was saying hit me like a physical blow. While Veronica had been spending money on designer clothes, elaborate parties, and professional staging consultations, my son had been working himself into exhaustion, trying to pay for expenses that didn't actually exist. "David," Veronica said, her voice taking on that manipulative tone she used when she wanted to control a situation, "you're getting upset over nothing. So what if your mother helped us out? That just proves she supports our relationship." "Helped us out?" David's voice was rising now. "Veronica, this is a 3-bedroom house in the best neighborhood in town. The market rent on this place is probably $2,400 a month. My mother has given us nearly $60,000 worth of housing over the past 2 years. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore, the current market rate for this property is $2,800 monthly, given the recent renovations and the neighborhood appreciation." David sat down heavily on the front porch steps, putting his head in his hands. $67,000. She's given us $67,000, and I had no idea. I moved to sit beside my son, my heart breaking for the stress he had been carrying unnecessarily. "David, I wanted it to be a gift. I wanted you to be able to save money and build your future without worrying about housing costs." "But why didn't you tell me?" he asked, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. "Why did you let me think we were paying rent?" Before I could answer, Veronica interrupted. "Because she wanted to control us," she said, her voice sharp and bitter. "She wanted to be able to hold it over our heads whenever she felt like it. This is exactly what she's doing right now, using her generosity to manipulate our family." David stood up and faced Veronica, and I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before. Genuine anger directed at the woman he loved. "Veronica, my mother just told me that she's given us almost $70,000 in free housing, and your response is to accuse her of manipulation?" "Well, what do you call this?" Veronica gestured wildly at the scene around us. "She shows up here with her property manager, disrupts my staging consultation, and starts making demands about our home. If that's not manipulation, what is?" "Your staging consultation?" David's voice was dangerous now. "What staging consultation?" Mrs. Henderson spoke up. "Mr. Whitmore, your wife contacted Premier Home Staging and told them she owned this property and wanted to prepare it for sale. She provided them with keys and what she claimed were ownership documents." The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at Veronica like he was seeing her for the first time. "You tried to sell my mother's house?" "I didn't try to sell anything," Veronica said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I was just getting information about property values in the area. It's called being financially responsible." "By lying about ownership? By telling people you own a house that belongs to my mother?" That's when the full story came pouring out. Mrs. Henderson had brought copies of all the communications from various vendors and service providers who had contacted our office after being told by Veronica that she owned the property. There were inquiries about insurance modifications, property tax questions, and even a consultation with a real estate attorney about, quote, transferring inherited property. David read through each document with growing horror. Veronica, you've been telling people all over town that you own this house. You told the insurance company you inherited it from a relative. You consulted with a lawyer about property transfer. This isn't getting information. This is fraud. It's not fraud, Veronica protested, but she was backing away from David now, clearly sensing that she was losing control of the situation. I was planning for our future. I was thinking ahead about what would be best for our family. Our family? David's laugh was bitter. What about my actual family? The family that has given us a free place to live for 2 years, while you spent money we didn't have on parties and clothes and staging consultations. That's when Veronica made the mistake that revealed everything. Your family doesn't understand what we're building here, David. They don't have the vision or the sophistication to appreciate what I've created. This house was just sitting here being wasted until I made it into something special. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. David looked at his wife, really looked at her, and I could see the moment when all of her manipulation and conditioning finally fell away from his eyes. What you've created, he said quietly. Veronica, you've created a life based on lies and other people's money. You've isolated me from my friends, excluded my family from our baby shower, and tried to steal my mother's house. What exactly have you created besides debt and drama? Veronica's mask finally came completely off. I've created a life where you're not stuck being a small-town nobody for the rest of your life. I've given you ambition and connections, and a chance to be something more than your family ever dreamed of being. The contempt in her voice when she said your family was unmistakable. David heard it too, and I watched as the last piece of his illusion about who Veronica really was crumbled away. Get out, he said, his voice steady and final. David, you can't be serious. I'm pregnant with your child. Get out of my mother's house, pack your things and get out. And for the first time since I'd met Veronica Kane, she had absolutely nothing to say. Veronica's shock at David's ultimatum lasted only a few seconds before it transformed into something much more dangerous, cold, calculated fury. Instead of the tears or pleading I might have expected, she straightened her shoulders, smoothed her dress, and looked at David with an expression that made my blood run cold. Fine, she said, her voice eerily calm. If that's how you want to play this, David, then let's play. She pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. But you should know that I'm not going anywhere without a fight. David looked confused by her sudden change in demeanor. Veronica, I'm not trying to fight with you. I just need you to understand that lying about owning my mother's property and trying to sell it is completely unacceptable. She looked up from her phone with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that your family has been manipulating this situation from the beginning, and now they're trying to throw me out when I'm 7 months pregnant, because I discovered their little scheme. Mrs. Henderson and I exchanged glances. Veronica was rewriting the narrative in real time, turning herself from the perpetrator into the victim with such skill that it was almost impressive. What scheme? David asked, genuine confusion in his voice. The scheme where your mother pretends to be generous while actually maintaining complete control over our lives, Veronica said, now typing even faster on her phone. Do you think it's a coincidence that she never told you about the free rent? She wanted you to feel stressed and grateful so you'd never question her authority in our relationship. I started to protest, but Veronica held up her hand to silence me. I'm documenting everything that's happening here, she announced. The harassment, the threats, the attempt to illegally evict a pregnant woman from her home. This isn't your home, David said, his patience clearly wearing thin, and nobody is harassing you. We're asking you to stop lying about property ownership. Veronica's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with satisfaction. My lawyer disagrees. I just sent him photos and a detailed description of this confrontation, and he says that as a long-term resident, I have tenant rights that can't be violated even if I'm not paying rent. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. Ma'am, if you'd like to discuss tenant rights, I'd be happy to provide you with the proper legal documentation. But claiming ownership of property that belongs to someone else is a criminal matter, not a tenant issue. "We'll see about that," Veronica said. Then she turned to David with an expression that I can only describe as predatory. "You might want to think very carefully about your next move, David, because I'm not just fighting for myself anymore, I'm fighting for our child." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. David's face went pale as he realized what she was implying. "Veronica, you wouldn't use our baby as a weapon in this." "I'm not using our baby as a weapon," she said with mock innocence. "I'm protecting our baby from a hostile family environment. What kind of mother would I be if I allowed my child to be raised around people who would throw us out on the street during my pregnancy?" I felt sick to my stomach. Veronica was systematically reframing every aspect of the situation to make herself look like a victim and us look like villains. And she was doing it with the cold precision of someone who had clearly thought through this scenario before. David's phone started ringing. He looked at the caller ID and frowned. "It's Kyle Richardson," he said, referring to one of his teaching colleagues. "Why would Kyle be calling me during work hours?" He answered the call, and I watched his expression change from confusion to horror as he listened. "What? No, that's not. Kyle, where did you hear that?" There was a long pause. "Facebook? What Facebook post?" Veronica was watching David's reaction with barely concealed satisfaction. That's when I realized what she had been doing on her phone. She hadn't just been texting a lawyer. She had been posting about the situation on social media, probably painting herself as a victim of family abuse. David hung up and stared at Veronica. "You posted about this on Facebook? You told people that my family is trying to throw you out while you're pregnant?" "I posted about the harassment and threats I'm experiencing," she said primly. "I have a right to document what's happening to me and to ask for support from my community." "Your community?" David's voice was getting louder. "Veronica, you've lived here for 2 years, and you've spent that entire time looking down on everyone in this town." She shrugged. "People change. I've learned to appreciate the support system I have here, and judging by the responses I'm getting, a lot of people are concerned about how I'm being treated." David's phone buzzed with what appeared to be a text message. Then another, and another. He looked at the screen with growing alarm. "Veronica, what exactly did you post?" Instead of answering, she showed him her phone screen. I couldn't see it from where I was standing, but I could see David's face as he read whatever she had written. His expression went through several stages: confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. "This is completely false," he said, his voice shaking. "You're claiming that my mother has been financially abusing us, and that she's threatening to make us homeless unless we comply with her demands about the baby." "Is that not what's happening?" Veronica asked with mock innocence. "No, that's not what's happening. My mother gave us free housing for 2 years, and you tried to sell her house." But Veronica had already moved on to her next tactic. She placed both hands on her pregnant belly in a gesture that was clearly designed for maximum emotional impact. "David, I need you to think about what's best for our child. Do you really want our baby to grow up knowing that their father chose his mother's real estate empire over their pregnant mother's well-being?" "Real estate empire?" David looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" That's when Veronica revealed just how much research she had been doing behind our backs. "Did you know that your mother owns 12 rental properties worth over $2 million? Did you know that she's been collecting rent from 11 other families while letting us live rent-free? Did you know that she could have helped us buy our own house, but chose to keep us dependent on her charity instead?" The numbers were roughly accurate, which meant Veronica had been investigating my finances without my knowledge. David looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, but something like betrayal. "Mom, is that true? Are you worth over $2 million? I felt trapped. Yes, the property portfolio was valuable, but explaining my financial situation in front of Veronica felt like handing her ammunition for future manipulation. "David, your father and I worked very hard to build financial security for our family." "So it is true," Veronica said triumphantly. "Your mother is wealthy, David. She could have helped us buy our own house, start our own equity, build our own future. Instead, She chose to keep us as her tenants so she could control us. David sat down on the porch steps again, looking overwhelmed. I need to process this, he said quietly. That's when Veronica played her final card. You don't have time to process, David. I'm 7 months pregnant, and your family just threatened to make me homeless. I need to know right now whether you're going to protect your wife and child, or whether you're going to side with people who see us as their property to control. She had backed David into an impossible corner, and she knew it. Either he supported her version of events, or he appeared to be choosing his mother over his pregnant wife. It was manipulation at its finest, and I could see that David was struggling with the emotional pressure. But then something unexpected happened. David's phone rang again, and this time the caller ID showed his principal's name. As he answered the call, I realized that Veronica's social media post wasn't just affecting our family, it was potentially affecting David's professional reputation as well. And that's when I knew that Veronica had just made the mistake that would finally show David exactly who she really was. David answered the call from his principal with trembling hands. "Hello, Mr. Patterson. Yes, I can talk for a minute." His face went from pale to ashen as he listened. "No, sir, that's not... What exactly are you seeing online?" I watched my son's world crumble as he listened to his principal explain that several parents and staff members had contacted the school about social media posts, suggesting that David was involved in some kind of family financial abuse situation. Veronica stood beside him, still typing on her phone, apparently updating her social media followers in real time about the ongoing harassment she was experiencing. "Mr. Patterson, I can explain everything," David said, his voice cracking. "There's been a misunderstanding." "No, sir. I understand your concern." "Yes, I'll come in first thing tomorrow morning to discuss this." When David hung up, his hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. "Veronica, what have you done? The school board is concerned about the posts you've made. Parents are calling asking if their children's teacher is involved in elder abuse or domestic violence." Veronica's response was chilling in its casualness. "I posted about my experience. I have every right to share my truth and ask for support from my community." "Your truth?" David's voice broke. "You've told people that my mother is financially abusing us and threatening to make us homeless. You've made it sound like I'm complicit in mistreating my pregnant wife. Do you understand that I could lose my job over this?" For the first time since this confrontation began, Veronica looked genuinely surprised. "Lose your job? That's ridiculous. You're a teacher, not a criminal." Mrs. Henderson spoke up quietly. "Ma'am, teachers are held to very high moral and ethical standards. Any suggestion of domestic violence or financial abuse, even if unfounded, can result in suspension pending investigation." The color drained from Veronica's face as she realized that her social media warfare might have consequences she hadn't anticipated. But instead of backing down or apologizing, she doubled down with an argument that revealed the depth of her selfishness. "Well, maybe this is a wake-up call," she said defensively. "Maybe it's time for David to pursue a more lucrative career anyway. Teaching doesn't pay enough to support a family, and if people are going to judge him based on social media posts, then maybe education isn't the right field for him." David stared at his wife like she was a stranger. "Veronica, I love teaching. It's not just my job, it's my calling. These kids depend on me, and some of them come from difficult backgrounds where I might be the only stable adult in their lives." "That's very noble," Veronica said with barely concealed sarcasm, "but nobility doesn't pay for baby formula or college funds. Maybe it's time to be more practical about our future." That's when I realized that Veronica's attack on our family wasn't just about the house or her social status. She had been systematically working to undermine every aspect of David's identity, his relationship with his family, his friendships, and now his career. She wanted to isolate him completely so she could rebuild him according to her own specifications. David's phone buzzed with another text message. He looked at it and his expression became even more strained. "It's from Mike Patterson," he said, referring to his longtime friend. "He says people are sharing your post and adding their own commentary. Someone started a thread asking if the school district knows that one of their teachers is involved in, quote, family abuse dynamics. Veronica shrugged. I can't control what other people post. But you can control what you post, David said, his voice growing stronger. And you can delete the lies you've already posted. They're not lies, Veronica insisted. I am being harassed by your family. I am being threatened with homelessness while pregnant. Those are facts. Mrs. Henderson pulled out her tablet and showed it to David. Mr. Whitmore, I've been taking screenshots of the social media posts in question. Would you like to see exactly what's been shared about your family? David nodded, and Mrs. Henderson handed him the tablet. As he read, I could see his jaw getting tighter, and his breathing becoming more labored. Finally, he looked up at Veronica with an expression of complete betrayal. You told people that my mother charges us excessive rent and threatens eviction whenever we don't comply with her demands about our personal lives. You said that she's been, quote, financially manipulating us by pretending to help while actually maintaining control. You claimed that she showed up today with a property manager to intimidate us because we refused to let her, quote, dictate our parenting decisions. And? Veronica crossed her arms defensively. And none of that is true, David's voice cracked with emotion. My mother has been letting us live rent-free for 2 years. She's given us almost $70,000 worth of free housing, and you've turned that generosity into a story about financial abuse. Generosity? Veronica's laugh was sharp and bitter. David, wake up. Your mother kept you in debt and stress for 2 years while she could have simply helped you buy your own house. That's not generosity. That's control. That's when David said something that I don't think any of us expected. Even if that were true, it wouldn't justify lying to the entire community about what happened here today. Veronica's confidence faltered for the first time. I didn't lie about anything. You lied about owning this house. You lied to the staging company, the insurance company, and the real estate attorney. You lied about being threatened with homelessness, when what actually happened is that you got caught trying to sell someone else's property. David stood up and faced his wife directly. Veronica, I've been making excuses for your behavior for 2 years. I've told myself that you were just adjusting to small-town life, or that you were stressed about the pregnancy, or that my family wasn't making enough effort to welcome you. But this isn't about adjustment or stress. This is about who you really are. Who I really am? Veronica's voice was getting higher and more defensive. You're someone who lies when it serves your purposes. You're someone who destroys other people's reputations to protect your own image. You're someone who would rather see me lose my job than admit you made a mistake. The truth hung in the air between them like a physical barrier. For the first time since I'd known her, Veronica seemed to realize that she had pushed too far, and that her usual manipulation tactics weren't working. But instead of apologizing or trying to make amends, she made one final play that revealed the true extent of her callousness. Fine, she said, pulling out her phone again. If that's how you feel, then let me make this very clear to everyone. She started typing rapidly, and I realized with horror that she was about to post another update, probably something designed to make David look even worse for choosing his family over his pregnant wife. That's when David reached over and took the phone out of her hands. No, he said simply, you're done destroying people today. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Veronica Kane was finally, completely speechless. The moment David took Veronica's phone away from her, something fundamental shifted in the dynamic. For the first time since I'd known her, Veronica had no control over the narrative, no ability to manipulate the situation through social media, and no way to immediately reframe herself as the victim. Give me my phone back, she demanded, reaching for it. You have no right to take my property. David held the phone away from her. Like you had no right to try to sell my mother's property? Veronica's face flushed red with anger. That's completely different, and you know it. How is it different? David asked, his voice eerily calm. You took something that didn't belong to you and tried to use it for your own purposes. That's exactly what I'm doing right now. I could see Veronica calculating her next move. Without her phone, she couldn't continue her social media campaign. couldn't document the confrontation for her followers, and couldn't control how the story was being told. She was, for perhaps the first time in years, completely powerless. "David," she said, switching to a softer, more manipulative tone, "I know you're upset, but we need to think about our baby. All this stress isn't good for me or for our child." But David wasn't falling for the manipulation anymore. "You're right, Veronica. All this stress isn't good for the baby. That's why you need to stop creating it." That's when Veronica made a mistake that revealed just how calculating she had been all along. "Look, I'll delete the posts, okay? I'll tell people there was a misunderstanding. But I want something in return." David stared at her. "You want something in return for telling the truth?" "I want a guarantee that we can continue living here rent-free until after the baby is born and I've recovered from childbirth. I want a written agreement that your mother won't evict us for at least 6 months." The audacity of her demand left all of us speechless for a moment. Even after being caught in multiple lies, even after trying to sell my house, even after posting false accusations on social media that could cost David his job, Veronica was still trying to negotiate from a position of strength. Mrs. Henderson was the first to respond. "Ma'am, you've just admitted that you posted false information on social media. That's defamation. You've also admitted to making fraudulent ownership claims about this property. Those are serious legal matters that can't be resolved with housing negotiations." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening to sue me?" "I'm explaining that your actions have legal consequences that exist independently of any housing arrangements," Mrs. Henderson replied calmly. That's when David's phone rang again. This time it was his brother-in-law, calling from 3 states away. David answered hesitantly. "Hey, Marcus, what? How did you?" Oh, God. I watched my son's face crumble as he listened to the call. When he hung up, he looked at Veronica with a mixture of devastation and rage. "My sister's husband just called. People are sharing your posts in family Facebook groups. My extended family in Ohio thinks I'm abusing my pregnant wife and that my mother is some kind of slumlord who exploits her own family." Veronica shrugged. "I can't control how people interpret information." "You can't control how people interpret lies, you mean," David shot back. "Veronica, you've destroyed my reputation with my own family. Cousins I grew up with are calling to ask if I need intervention or counseling." "Maybe you do need counseling," Veronica said, and I could hear the venom creeping back into her voice. "Maybe you need help understanding that your first loyalty should be to your wife and child, not to a mother who's been manipulating you your entire life." David set Veronica's phone down on the porch railing and pulled out his own phone. "You know what, Veronica? Let me show you what manipulation actually looks like." He started scrolling through his photos, apparently looking for something specific. When he found it, he showed the screen to Veronica. "This is a photo you posted 3 months ago. Remember this?" I couldn't see the image, but I could see Veronica's face change as she looked at it. So you're standing in our kitchen, wearing a dress that costs more than most people make in a week, talking about your quote, gratitude for the beautiful life we've built together. You tagged it with #blessed and #grateful and #perfect-life. David swiped to another photo. "This one is from last month. You're in our living room with all the expensive furniture you bought, talking about how thankful you are for your dream home and your amazing support system." He kept swiping, showing her image after image. "Here's one from 2 weeks ago, where you're posing in our backyard talking about family values and building something beautiful. And here's my personal favorite. This one from last week, where you're holding your ultrasound picture in what you called the nursery we've created with so much love." Veronica was getting visibly uncomfortable. "David, what's your point?" "My point is that you've spent 2 years posting about how perfect our life is, how grateful you are, how much you love our home and our family. And now, the moment you get caught lying, you want to claim that it's all been abuse and manipulation?" David handed me his phone so I could see the images. What I saw broke my heart. Picture after picture of Veronica in my house, wearing expensive clothes, surrounded by luxury items, talking about gratitude and blessings and perfect lives. She had been using our generosity as content for her social media image while apparently resenting us the entire time. People change, David, Veronica said defensively. I've learned to see the situation more clearly. Or, David said, his voice getting stronger and more confident with each word, you've been lying the entire time. Either you were lying then when you posted about how grateful and blessed you were, or you're lying now when you claim we've been abusing you. Which is it, Veronica? Veronica's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. She had been caught in an impossible contradiction, and for once her quick tongue had failed her. That's when Mrs. Henderson spoke up again. Mr. Whitmore, I should let you know that I've been in contact with our legal counsel about the fraudulent ownership claims. They've advised me that we need to file a police report about the attempted property fraud, regardless of how this family situation resolves. Veronica's face went white. Police report? Ma'am, you contacted multiple businesses claiming to own property that belongs to someone else. You provided false documentation and attempted to engage services for a property sale. That's fraud. And it's a criminal matter. For the first time since this confrontation began, Veronica looked genuinely scared. But I didn't actually sell anything. I was just exploring options. Attempting fraud is still fraud, Mrs. Henderson explained patiently. Intent to commit the crime is sufficient for criminal charges. David looked at his wife with an expression I had never seen before. Not love, not anger, but something like pity. Veronica, how did we get here? How did you go from the woman I fell in love with to someone who would lie to police and destroy my career to avoid taking responsibility for your mistakes? Veronica's response revealed everything about who she really was underneath all the manipulation and social climbing. I didn't change, David. I just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. And if you can't handle the real me, then maybe we both need to reconsider what we're doing here. It was a threat, disguised as vulnerability, one final attempt to make David choose between accepting her behavior or losing his family. But this time, David was ready with an answer that surprised all of us. You're right, Veronica. Maybe we do need to reconsider what we're doing here. David's words hung in the air like a death sentence for their marriage. Veronica's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like panic before settling into cold fury. You don't mean that, she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. You're upset right now, but you'll calm down and realize that I'm the one who's been wronged here. David shook his head slowly. No, Veronica. I think I'm seeing clearly for the first time in 2 years. And what I see is someone who has been systematically lying to me, manipulating me and destroying my relationships with everyone I care about. That's not true, Veronica protested, but even as she said it, I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. David, I love you. I'm carrying your child. We can work through this. Can we? David asked. Because working through this would require you to acknowledge what you've done wrong, and I haven't heard you take responsibility for anything that's happened today. Veronica's response was swift and revealed just how little remorse she actually felt. Fine. I'm sorry I explored our property options without discussing it with you first. I'm sorry I got overwhelmed and posted about our family situation on social media. There. Are you happy now? David laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Veronica, you just called fraud, exploring property options, and defamation getting overwhelmed. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. That's when Veronica deployed what I recognized as her nuclear option, the threat she had been building toward throughout this entire confrontation. David, if you're really considering ending our marriage, you need to understand what that means. I'm not going to make this easy for you. What do you mean by that? David asked, though I could tell from his expression that he already suspected what was coming. I mean that I'll fight for everything, Veronica said, her voice taking on a harder edge. I'll fight for this house, for alimony, for full custody of our child. And I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man abandons his pregnant wife when she needs him most. The threat was clear. If David didn't submit to her demands, she would destroy him financially, legally, and socially. It was emotional terrorism disguised as self-defense. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "Ma'am, I feel obligated to point out that you can't fight for a house that you don't own and have never owned. And given the documented fraud attempts and defamatory social media posts, any custody battle might not go the way you're expecting." Veronica whirled on Mrs. Henderson with fury that was genuinely frightening. "You don't know what you're talking about. I've been living in this house for 2 years. I've made it my home. I have rights." "You have tenant rights," Mrs. Henderson said calmly. "But tenant rights don't include the right to claim ownership or attempt to sell the property. And they certainly don't include the right to defame the property owner when you're caught breaking the law." That's when Veronica made her final miscalculation. Instead of backing down or trying to negotiate, she escalated to a level that shocked even me. "You know what? Fine. If this family wants to play hardball, then let's play hardball. David, I want you to choose right now. Either you support me and we present a united front against your mother's attempts to control our lives, or I'm going to make sure this divorce destroys you." "Divorce?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. "Veronica, I haven't said anything about divorce." "Haven't you?" Veronica's smile was cruel. "What do you think reconsidering what we're doing here means? You've already made your choice, David. You've chosen your mother over your wife and child." I watched my son process this ultimatum, and I could see him finally understanding the impossible position Veronica had been putting him in for months. Every disagreement, every boundary issue, every family conflict had been framed as a choice between her and everyone else in his life. "You're right," David said quietly. "I have made my choice." Veronica's expression shifted to triumph, clearly thinking she had won. "Good. Then we can." "I choose honesty over manipulation," David interrupted. "I choose family who love me unconditionally over someone who uses our child as a weapon. I choose keeping my integrity over enabling your lies." The color drained from Veronica's face as she realized that her ultimatum had backfired spectacularly. "David, you can't be serious. I'm 7 months pregnant." "I know you're pregnant," David said, his voice strengthening with each word. "And I will support our child financially and emotionally for the rest of my life. But I can't continue to enable your behavior or pretend that what you've done today is acceptable." Veronica's composure finally cracked completely. "You bastard," she spat. "You're really going to throw away our marriage over some property dispute?" "This isn't about property," David replied. "This is about character. And today has shown me everything I need to know about yours." That's when Veronica played what she clearly thought was her trump card. She pulled a business card from her purse. Apparently, she had come prepared for this possibility. "This is my attorney's card," she said, holding it out to David. "He specializes in family law and high-asset divorces. You might want to get yourself a lawyer, too, because I'm going to take you for everything you're worth." David looked at the business card but didn't take it. "Veronica, I'm a public school teacher. I don't have any assets to take." "Maybe not," Veronica said with a vindictive smile, "but your mother does. And since you've been living off her money, I think I have a claim to some of that wealth, too." The sheer audacity of the statement left all of us speechless. Veronica was threatening to sue my son for assets that belonged to me, using money I had given them as evidence that she deserved more money from me. Mrs. Henderson was the first to respond. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand how family law works. Your husband's mother's assets are not marital property subject to division." "We'll see about that," Veronica said. "Especially when I explained to a judge how Mrs. Whitmore has been using her wealth to control and manipulate our marriage." That's when I finally spoke up. "Veronica, I think you should be very careful about making false accusations in legal proceedings. Perjury is a serious crime." "False accusations?" Veronica laughed harshly. "Everything I've said today is true. You did control our living situation. You did keep us dependent on your charity. You did show up here today to threaten me." David shook his head in amazement. "Veronica, do you even hear yourself? You're calling free housing, quote, control, and calling accountability threats. You've rewritten reality so completely that I don't think you even know what's true anymore." "I know what's true," Veronica said, her voice rising to near hysteria. "I know that your family has never accepted me. I know that your mother has been waiting for an excuse to get rid of me. And I know that you're too weak to stand up to her." The words were designed to hurt, to make David doubt himself one final time. But instead of crumbling under the attack, David stood straighter and looked at his wife with something that looked almost like relief. "You know what, Veronica? You're absolutely right about one thing. This has been a long time coming, and I'm done pretending otherwise." For the first time since I'd known her, Veronica Kane had nothing left to say. The silence that followed David's final declaration stretched for what felt like an eternity. Veronica stood there, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, and for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed to realize that her manipulation tactics had finally failed completely. "David," she said, her voice smaller now, almost pleading, "you can't mean this. We're having a baby together. We're supposed to be a family." David looked at his wife with an expression that broke my heart, not anger anymore, but genuine sadness for what they had lost. "We are going to be a family, Veronica. Just not the kind of family you were trying to create." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward diplomatically. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Kane, perhaps we should discuss the immediate practical matters. Regardless of your marital situation, there are legal issues that need to be addressed regarding the property fraud and the defamatory social media posts." Veronica's head snapped toward Mrs. Henderson. "I told you I'd delete the posts." "Deleting them now doesn't undo the damage they've already caused," Mrs. Henderson explained patiently. "Mr. Whitmore's professional reputation has been compromised, and multiple businesses were defrauded with false ownership claims. These matters have consequences beyond family disputes." The reality of her situation finally seemed to hit Veronica. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid rather than angry. "What? What kind of consequences?" David answered before Mrs. Henderson could. "The kind that might affect our child's future, Veronica. The kind that might require you to get a lawyer for criminal charges, rather than divorce proceedings." I watched my son speak with a clarity and strength I hadn't seen from him in 2 years. The stress and uncertainty that had been weighing him down were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose I recognized from his childhood. David had always been at his best when he knew exactly what was right and what was wrong. "I don't understand how this happened," Veronica said, and for a moment she sounded genuinely confused rather than manipulative. "Everything was perfect. We had a beautiful home, a baby on the way, a good life. Why couldn't you just be grateful for what we had?" David's answer was gentle but firm. "Because what we had was built on lies, Veronica. You were grateful for a life you thought you had created through your own merit, but it was actually created through my mother's generosity. When you found out the truth, instead of being genuinely grateful, you felt entitled to more." "I deserved more," Veronica said, and there was the core of her personality laid bare. Not gratitude for unexpected blessings, but resentment that those blessings weren't bigger. "Maybe you did deserve more," David said, "but you didn't deserve to get it through fraud and manipulation, and you definitely didn't deserve to destroy other people to get it." Mrs. Henderson checked her watch. "I hate to interrupt, but I do need to address the immediate housing situation. Mrs. Kane, you'll need to make arrangements for alternative accommodation. Given the circumstances, we can give you 30 days' notice, which is more than legally required." Veronica looked panicked. 30 days? But I'm pregnant. I don't have anywhere to go." David spoke up. "Veronica, you have friends from your social media world. You have the connections you've been cultivating for 2 years. And you have family back in Riverside Heights. You're not homeless." "Those aren't real relationships," Veronica admitted, and it was perhaps the most honest thing she had said all day. Those people, they were just impressed by my lifestyle. If I don't have this house, this image, they won't want anything to do with me. The confession revealed everything about Veronica's motivations. She hadn't been building genuine connections or community. She had been constructing an elaborate performance designed to impress people she didn't actually like. And now that the performance was ending, she was discovering how hollow her carefully curated life really was. Then maybe it's time to build real relationships, David suggested. Maybe it's time to be honest about who you are and what you actually need, rather than trying to be someone you're not. I stepped forward, knowing I needed to address something that had been weighing on my mind throughout this entire confrontation. Veronica, I want you to know that despite everything that's happened today, I don't hate you. I'm disappointed and hurt, but I don't hate you. She looked at me with genuine surprise. You don't? No, you're carrying my grandchild, and that means you'll always be part of our extended family in some way. But it also means that I need to protect that child from growing up in an environment built on lies and manipulation. Veronica's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her all day. I never meant for things to get this complicated. I wanted to belong somewhere. I wanted to feel important. David's expression softened slightly. Veronica, you could have belonged here. My family would have welcomed you if you had let them. But you spent 2 years looking down on us instead of getting to know us. I was scared, she admitted. Scared that if people knew who I really was, just a girl from a middle-class family with student loans and no special talents, they wouldn't think I was good enough for you. It was a moment of vulnerability that explained so much of her behavior. Veronica hadn't been malicious from the beginning. She had been insecure and had made increasingly bad choices to protect an image she thought she needed to maintain. But that's exactly who I fell in love with, David said quietly. The girl who was smart and funny and real. Not the performance you've been putting on for the past 2 years. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat gently. I don't want to interrupt this conversation, but we do need to discuss the legal timeline. Mrs. Kane, you'll need to remove the social media posts immediately and post a correction acknowledging that your previous statements were inaccurate. You'll also need to contact all the businesses you've defrauded and provide written retractions of your ownership claims. Veronica nodded numbly. And if I do all that? Then we'll discuss whether criminal charges are necessary or whether this can be resolved as a civil matter with restitution for damages. David handed Veronica her phone back. Veronica, I'll help you find a good apartment. I'll make sure you have everything you need for the baby. I'll be the best co-parent I can be, but I can't continue to enable behavior that hurts everyone around us. Veronica took her phone with shaking hands. David, is there any chance? Could we try counseling? Could we work on this? David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him genuinely considering the question. Finally, he shook his head. Veronica, counseling works when both people are committed to honesty and change. Today has shown me that you're not ready for either of those things yet. Maybe someday you will be, but right now, I need to focus on preparing to be a good father. 3 months later, I'm sitting in my kitchen writing this story, and I can see David through the window playing with baby Lily in the backyard. Veronica chose to move back to Riverside Heights after the birth, and while the custody arrangement isn't perfect, it's working. She did post the corrections and retractions Mrs. Henderson required, and we decided not to pursue criminal charges. David kept his teaching job after a difficult conversation with the school board, and his colleagues have been incredibly supportive. He's a wonderful father, and watching him with Lily reminds me why I was so determined to protect our family from manipulation and lies. Veronica still struggles with honesty and accountability, but she's in counseling now, and I hope she'll eventually learn to build genuine relationships instead of performances. For Lily's sake, I hope Veronica finds the peace and authenticity she was looking for all along. As for me, I've learned that generosity without boundaries isn't actually generous. It's enabling. I still help my family, but I do it with clear expectations and honest communication. Because sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop allowing them to use your kindness against you. The house on Elm Street has new tenants now, a young couple who teach at the same school as David. They're genuinely grateful for the reduced rent I offer them, and they treat the property with respect. It's a reminder that there are good people in the world who appreciate generosity without trying to exploit it. And David? He's building the authentic life that Veronica was too afraid to pursue. He's surrounded by people who love him for who he actually is, not for what he can provide or what image he can help them maintain. He's learned that real family doesn't manipulate or threaten or demand impossible choices. Real family just loves you and shows up for you, even when the truth is difficult and the situation is complicated. That's the kind of grandmother I plan to be for Lily, and the kind of mother I'm proud to have been for David. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.